Well, welcome to today's Ask the Mayor program. We're on location at Miss Dot Padgett's house here on Price Avenue, and as you know, I love to do these programs on location and not do them in the studio, and we appreciate you inviting us in today to talk about a special project that you worked on some time ago.
Oh, yes.
That is, I believe, very important. I know it went a long ways back. I'm looking through here, and I see where you started the material in 1875. Tell us a little bit about 1875 and what happened then.
Oh, well, first of all, let me tell you how delighted I was to find out that this material was available and to find out that we had these archives, and when historians want things to be accurate and factual, so I felt like the City Council minutes would be, and I wanted to thank Joyce Stone in your office for making them available to me. She hauled these huge big ledgers in and out for me, and so I appreciated her doing that for me. 1875 was when the city of Douglasville was chartered, and I think you have a lot of information on how that process started, but that was March 1875 was the very first meeting of the City Council. And would you like to know what the first order of business was?
You know, the thing that's going to amaze me about what you're getting ready to say is, of course, in 1875, things were a little bit cheaper than they are today. But I think it's going to, and what we're going to cover today is going to give folks kind of a flavor of what the city of Douglasville was like back then. What did happen in 1875 other than the charter being
Well, the
adopted?
very first order of business was to order, they appropriated the sum of 10 cents to order candles and stationery. Now, how would you like to have the sum of 10 cents to order anything? You couldn't even get a stick of gum for 10 cents.
Can't buy a postage stamp.
10 cents to write. 10 cents for, that was the first order of business. And as a matter of fact, I will put a little plug in here for the City of Douglasville room exhibit up at the old Courthouse Museum. Mm-hmm. There is a City of Douglasville room up there designated to the city, and I put together a booklet, and I called the title of it was the first order of business. And it was all of this that I had taken out of those archives, which I was just delighted to have.
Well, you've done a remarkable job. I've read through this a couple of times.
Good.
And as we were talking earlier before we started today's show, it actually gives a view into the past, and a lot of things have changed, but not much has changed on some of these things. I know some of the things that we're going to talk about later are things that we're dealing with today, but for example, 10 cents, it may be $10 million that we're dealing with today.
Correct. That's right. Totally different. Well, it's just a picture of the past, but the things that were taking place were the things that you have to deal with now, and that's the education, the schools. Well, the county does more of that now, but your water, your electricity, the streets, and the city officials. But an interesting thing is that back then the mayors were elected for a one-year term. How does that suit you?
Well, you know,
but they didn't
that
have
would be a lot of
campaign.
campaigning. We'll talk a little bit later about the number of votes that they got, and that's really amazing. The first mayor, could you tell us a little bit about, well, first of all, who it was? Well, actually, the first mayor of Douglasville.
Well, the first mayor was Joe James, and because he was a very prominent person, and we still have people in the county.
Sure.
The James family, and so that he actually was the first mayor, and then as you would come along, the other mayors would be people who we still have family in the county left. Some of the people, and interestingly enough, young Van Zant, who gave the 40 acres for the city of Douglasville, was never the mayor. I don't know whether they didn't want him to elect. Oh, he probably didn't.
Maybe he didn't want it.
He didn't want it, so he was busy. But he gave the 40 acres for the site of Douglasville so that they would put the county seat there. There were other places that had been selected down on the river. Other places had been selected, so he gave 40 acres. Then the city divided it up into lots. They were sold for $200, and this money went to the treasurer. So that was the first money that went into the Treasury,
Went
and
into
that's
the
how
Treasury.
this happened. Yeah, but you didn't tell us when it was the charter, which was not well. It was just routine.
Well, the General Assembly established that in February of 1875.
Correct.
And actually, that process is still in place today. If a city wants to change their charter, then there are a couple of ways you can do it, but the best way to do it is through the General Assembly. And so even today, the General Assembly changes charters for cities, and we have several new cities in the state of Georgia.
Yeah,
and they adopted those charters for them in a very similar fashion to the way they did it back in 1875. And just looking through here, there are some things in here that, as I said, some things are still the same, but they're a little bit different. For example, here's in 1882, they issued a business license for $5 to sell general merchandise.
General merchandise, correct.
And, of course, cities still do that today.
Not for $5.
It's a little bit different formula today on
we have to correct that. You'll have a lot of business people calling you up, Mr. Mayor.
One of the interesting things that I saw as I was going through here, and again, we're still doing the same thing, and it was when they started the academy, the college here in Douglasville, which was June 4th, 1887.
87, right.
And what you were able to find in the minutes is it says on June 4th, 1887, a draft plan for an academy cost $1,800. It was at Douglasville College, and it was grades 1 through college level.
That's right.
And actually it opened in 1889, according to what you were able to find out. And we're doing the same thing today. We worked with Georgia Highlands College.
Correct.
And we're opening a college here in Douglasville. Actually, it's over in the old Walmart where they're starting off, and the city has actually donated 50 acres of land for their main campus. So did you uncover any of the other interesting items about the college?
Well, of course, they had to appropriate the money for the furniture and this type of thing.
Right.
But no, that was all that I remember that I put down in there. Yes, I did.
I wonder what happened to the college and why it closed.
I don't remember that.
I've never heard anyone talk about it.
Well, it closed very early, but there's a lot of information about it in other books that we could find out if somebody wanted to know in other books that I didn't get. I think you skipped something.
Oh, I skipped a lot. I skipped several years.
Yeah. I think you skipped things that are probably not as timely as what we have now, but you did speak about the $5 for a license.
A business license.
For a business license. But it was $500 if you wanted to get a whiskey license in the city of Douglasville. And you had to swear that you would not sell to minors unless they had their parents' consent.
So they could drink if they had their parents' consent.
That's what the book said.
Is that right?
That was how it was written, that you couldn't sell it. But there was obviously that was a pretty good business that was going on if it was $500 that you had to pay for it. So I don't know what that says for our county. But one of the things that I picked up in here that I thought that was funny, and I understand Roy Mims is your finance committee chairman,
yes.
Correct? Well, I don't know if he's had to deal with this or not, but they found a dead dog on the street one day, so they referred it to the finance committee.
I saw that. Here's one in February of 1887, and guess how much it cost according to what you found out. It says D.W. Price paid a citizen the sum of 25 cents to remove a dead dog.
To remove a dead dog.
Now, we have animal control today.
That's correct.
And they have
it's all the same.
Some trucks and things like that, but it's a little bit more expensive to remove the animals today. But they were doing the basic services for citizens.
Everything. These pioneers laid it out, the things that we're doing, exactly the same things that we've needed. The sewer lines, the electric lines, the telephones, everything. So, we obviously had some the prominent citizens then that had a lot of vision and a lot of foresight.
Well, they did.
And we still have to do the same thing. You all have to improve on everything that they've done.
It was very difficult. And going through here, and we'll talk about some of these things later, that are a little bit easier today. For example, they started their own power company here and put up their own power poles. They started their own sewer system. And it's amazing to me that, as far back as the 1800s, they were doing some of those things. But I think it just shows that people wanted to live in cities. They wanted to live in areas that they could have services provided for them. And our founding fathers were doing that back in the late 1800s.
Well, this was a time when the railroads were had taken over the country. And so Douglasville was right in on being able to be on the railroad track, and the railroad going through it. That was an interesting thing. We also found out when the Bankhead Highway, or Highway 78, was that, I think it was 1917 maybe, when that was first, they commissioned to have a petition to have it built from Austell to Villarica. Right. And then in the 1930s was when they came along and really made it into the federal paved highway.
Bankhead Highway.
But see, we had to have transportation. We had to have all the things that we have now. I was looking for something in here. As you talk, I'll look for it.
One of the interesting things that I noticed in 1907, you have the Treasury Report, which is on page 3 here.
Yeah. And
for our viewers, these are some numbers that may be interesting. Cash on hand, they had $22.90.
Right.
And in their general fund, which was basically their operating account, they only had $1,230. And they had a college fund, which had more money in it than any of the other funds. It had $1,578, which to me meant that education was important, even back then. And they had street fees of $101. So they had the same general accounts that we have today. Of course, street fees are called transportation today. But it's interesting to see the amounts of money.
Right, that's right. Well, the disbursement for the college fund was $157, so obviously for that month it was not very much what they had to put out for that one. But education was important to them, and I believe that says a lot for our early days too. Let's see, did I mention to you about the number of votes? You were going to say something about that.
Actually, in 1907, I was looking at this. It says the mayor and council members each got 60 votes, except one only received 59. His wife didn't vote for him.
No, now wait a minute. See, this brings up something that I was going to say. And you obviously have forgotten that women did not vote in 1909.
I did not know.
You had forgotten
That's
that
exactly
women's
right.
suffrage was only till Georgia, the state of Georgia ratified it in 1921. So if you notice that there were 30 people voted, or 34 people voted, it was then in 1921, 50-something people voted. So that means that at least 20
women could vote.
Women voted in
That is interesting.
Yeah, well, actually 1992, and so it was only the women's suffrage was. See that people, I bet you.
I had forgotten because it's just assumed today that there's equal rights.
That's
right. It's hard
to. It was on my birthday, August the 26th. Now, not the year, but it was on my birthday. So now I get every once in a while somebody will have a postcard of these women's suffrage marching through. It took them 50 years to get it done, and they marched on everything everything. Like we march on City Hall sometimes.
Sure, you guys come to see us, and I'm glad you do. It's important.
But they got it done. They always wore long white dresses and white hats. So I may show up there someday in a long white dress and a long hat, and you'll say, "Oh, she was."
That'll be okay.
Yeah, but that was the women's suffrage movement, and that was why they got so few votes early on.
Yeah, it was amazing to go through here and look at the small number of votes that.
You would have thought there was a lack of interest, but of course, Douglasville. It was only 1931 that they had gotten up to 600 people, the population.
And that's still consistent today. A very high voter turnout in the city will be about 30% of the registered voters that actually turn out to vote, even today.
Even today.
And it was probably very similar back then.
Well, you should be pleased with that because a lot of people only vote to put somebody out of office.
That's true.
So those high votes might
That's right.
be an
They might mean
indication of
something.
that.
You know, what's interesting in 1907 also is the salaries of the council members.
Let the public know what the salaries are.
Well, according to what you were able to find out, the annual salary for council members in 1907 was $50 for a council member, $75 for the mayor, the marshal, which would be our
sheriff.
police chief,
Yeah,
I assume
police chief,
today,
yeah.
was $300, and the attorney, Mr. Joel Dodson, needs to hear this, $35.
$35. I thought about Joel when I read that. I almost sent him a letter asking him if he would work for $35 anymore. But that was an interesting thing.
You know, also in 1907, you mentioned being able to sell alcohol only to adults and to minors.
Mine's with parental.
Here's an interesting thing. In 1907, Dorset Drugstore paid $6.90 for their business license, but there was a motion passed to allow the drugstore to be open on Sunday. They had to take some council action in order to.
And if you will notice, Dr. Dorset was also the mayor at the time.
Oh, so he got it. Oh, now I understand.
So even back then, they had their own. Sometimes they had their own agendas.
That does happen from time to time.
It does indeed, yes. But
there are other things in here. This is so interesting. Looking through here, where they're talking about a canning company. There was obviously a canning company here in town where they authorized a sidetrack off of the railroad track. To go to the canning company. And even back then, they had committees. I noticed in 1908, the mayor appointed committees.
They had, it was very...
He had a streetlight committee.
Streetlight committee.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was interesting.
And another thing that was interesting to me, he appointed a committee to purchase a clock for the night watchman. Now, what do you think the night watchman, is that someone that stayed in town to kind of look over things?
They kind of rattle the doors at night. We had a night watchman here for many, many years. I can remember a night watchman in early 40s, and he just would go and check and sort of rattle the doors, be sure they were locked and things like that. And so I don't know how much crime we had back then, but I thought that was a very interesting procedure to buy that night watchman's clock. It took them about 3 months to decide what was the date on that. And I think about 3 months later, the mayor finally decided the committee was not going to make a decision. Well, their decision was that they couldn't afford it. So the mayor finally decided, well, we have to have a clock for him. So he ordered a clock for him. Just to try it. And then they decided they would keep the clock. And I think at $52 or something like that, which must have been a pretty good
nice clock. You know, let's jump to 1909. This obviously was a very important decision. It says property purchase for a power plant. I assume that's correct. The electrical power here, which was on the north side of the railroad. In Block 10, I'm not sure what Block 10 was, but...
well, it was what is Parker Street, the little street that's not, we have the railroad, Strickland Street, and then the next street north of that. And that was where the power plant was for many, many years.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where it was just a small building.
And this was an expensive purchase, $10,000 back then.
Well, I don't know if that was that for the entire building, or was that maybe for the installation of some of the...
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that might have been for some of the light poles and so forth.
And it's interesting that in 1909 also, the bonds for the electrical plant was paid for in gold coins.
Oh, I know it. Love that.
And there was an election, apparently, and I'm just trying to read some things into this that I'm really not sure about, but it appears there was an election on whether they were going to build the plant or not. and there were 144 people that voted for it, and one person voted against it.
Yeah,
Why do you think
I
that
don't
person
know.
voted against it?
I don't know. You know, well, don't we still have things sometimes you'll get one person who votes against it?
You do.
Yeah.
From time
They
to
have their
time.
reasons. I don't know.
Maybe it was
The
a
devil's
person.
advocate, I guess. Is that what you call them when one person votes against it?
Maybe they didn't want to see progress or didn't want things to change, possibly, and thought that would change the lifestyle in the city, or you never know. But I thought that was interesting. But it also probably tells us about how many people were in the city then, because you would think that a lot of people would come out and vote for
When I
something
see
like that.
only that time again, only the males could vote who owned property,
So
if you remember.
somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 people maybe or so that lived in, 144 people actually voted.
Well, see, if that would be much
145.
more than that, because if they were married, it would double, and of course you had to own property also. If you remember the laws then have changed a great deal since then. The numbers
Sure.
of the types of people who can vote, or who has the privilege of voting back then was quite different from now.
Sure. I was reading this item, and it says in 1909, they borrowed $2,000 from Farmers and Merchants Bank at 8%. Now, that building still stands today,
Yeah.
and 8% is a higher
High.
interest rate than you can
It
get
is.
today.
I know.
Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting.
And, of course, that was something to do with their electrical plant. But so here we are in 1909 talking about a building that's still standing, and actually it still has the name Farmers and Merchants Bank on the front of the building.
Oh, yeah. That's one of our most beautiful historic buildings in downtown Douglasville. And thankfully we've been able to, it had a shop in there, a print shop.
Right.
And so we don't know, we hope something comes in there very soon. But that is a beautiful building. And that building was built at a time when they did different added little nice things to them. And if you look at it, those leaded glass fan-shaped windows, if you're ever in that building in the afternoon, that's one of the prettiest sights, looking through those leaded glass windows. Yeah, it was just had some of the things that they don't add to buildings. I don't know why it is, but about that time, a lot of towns were ordering that type of windows from Germany and Austria.
I see.
And I've been into several historic buildings of that era, and it would have those same things.
Same
So
buildings,
thankfully,
yeah.
Douglasville had somebody that could afford to do that
Sure.
and would do that, because that makes it well, it says something for your town if you add the little extras.
It does, and actually I've seen some old pictures of that building, and
Yeah.
some folks standing outside,
That's right.
and it had the things that you would tie your horses up to the front of it.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess they stayed there for a long time, even after cars were there. But and it had the wooden sidewalks out front.
Well, speaking of cars, did you see the speed limits?
You know, I did, and I don't remember where I saw
Well,
that.
it's-
But the penalties is what caught
real
my
high.
attention.
Correct. Well, you'd be fine if you were going. The speed limit on the streets were, of course, this was back up into the 20s, and it would have been 20 miles an hour
I think it was,
on the
yeah.
street, but 10 miles an hour going through an intersection.
Exactly. You had to slow down at the
But
intersection.
don't get caught. You either find $10, $100. If you couldn't find the $100, you'd be put in the city caboose. Did you notice where city caboose is mentioned through there a number of times?
I did, and you know, for speeding, if you could not pay the fine, you got 30 days of hard labor.
Hard labor.
And you had to. Now think about that today.
Right.
30 days for speeding.
Now, the hard labor was working on the streets,
Right.
and that's what they've have talked about.
You know, this has been great, and there's a lot more here that I certainly would like to go over with you, but it's going to take some time to go through this. So this is probably a good time to stop and thank our listening audience for being with us today. We certainly appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. This is very interesting to me. I hope it is to our audience, taking a look back in history. And thank you for taking the time to put this together. I know it took a long time. I saw you in and out of City Hall for months really putting this together. But thank you very much, and we appreciate it. And we will continue another segment of Ask the Mayor program and talk about some of the other issues.
Great, because there's some very timely subjects in here. Some subjects and some events and things that are taking place right now that took place in this city years ago. So we need to do that.
Well, thank you for joining us on today's Ask the Mayor program.